So it's going to take a minute for everyone to join on here, but again, we're basically consider yourself live now. I will start the talking, and we'll go from there. Hello, and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall. My name is Chris, and I'll be the operator for this evening's event. We're going to be discussing the facts behind Measure 105, which is on your ballot this November. We want to hear from you, so if at any time tonight you have a question that you'd like to ask, all you have to do is push 0 on your phone to ask that question. Again, my name is Chris, and I'm the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall, where we will be discussing the facts behind Measure 105, which is on your ballot this November. Tonight, we're going to be joined by 2 wonderful speakers. The first of the speakers is going to be Amber Clay. Amber and her husband operate a farm. We're also going to be joined by Dana Bieber. Dana Bieber is an advocate for the No on 105 Coalition and an expert on food labeling. If you're just joining us now, please go ahead and push 0 on your phone to ask a question. We'd love to hear from you on tonight's telephone town hall about Proposition 105. We really want to hear from you about Proposition 105. So again, all you have to do is push 0 on your phone to ask a question. And we are joined again by 2 great speakers. And I'm going to introduce the first speaker now and let her say a few words. Our first speaker is Amber Clay. Amber and her husband Doug operate Clay Land and Livestock. They farm wheat and alfalfa, and their farming operation provides feed for several dairies. Amber is also a member of the Colorado Farm Bureau. She was on the Food Systems Advisory Council appointed by the governor, and she helped design a preschool curriculum around ag, education, and nutrition. Amber, why don't you go ahead and say hello to everyone?
Hello. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and learn about Proposition 105 and the serious demands it has on family farmers.
Thanks, Amber. Again, my name is Chris, and I'm the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall about Proposition 105, which is on your ballot this November. We really do want to hear from you tonight. Tonight's event is all about interactivity, so if you have a question that you want to ask us, all you have to do is push 0 on your phone to ask that question. Our next speaker for tonight is Dana Bieber. Dana is an advocate for the No on 105 Coalition and has studied the public policy impacts of mandatory single-state labeling proposals such as Proposition 105. Ms. Bieber has presented information related to the science behind GMOs, cost impacts of mandatory labeling proposals, the accuracy and the reliability of the information provided by these labels, and the indirect economic impacts for farmers, for food producers, for taxpayers, and for consumers. Dana, why don't you say hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening so we can have a discussion on Proposition 105. As we're getting started, I'd like to spend just about a minute or so and give you a little bit of an overview of the measure that you guys are going to be voting on here this November. You know, Proposition 105, to hear the proponents talk about it, it's all about providing information about if there are GMO ingredients in the food or not. But that's actually where the measure fails consumers. In fact, Proposition 105 is so poorly written that thousands of food products that actually contain GMO ingredients in them wouldn't be labeled only because they get a special exemption. At the same time, there are thousands of food products that don't contain any GMO ingredients in them, but because of the way Proposition 105 is written, they would have to be labeled as such. This provides nothing but misleading and inaccurate information for consumers. But at the same time, our coalition fully recognizes that there are consumers who do prefer to purchase foods without GMO ingredients in them. And for those people, there are already 2 nationwide labeling systems. They can look for the organic label or non-GMO. Both of them are reliable and accurate, unlike Proposition 105. Aside from getting the bad information, the other failings of Proposition 105 is the fact it's going to increase costs, not just for consumers, but for taxpayers as well. So we'll look at the consumer cost of this and have some discussions about it tonight, but what it's going to require is complete segregation for all food products just for the state of Colorado. Everything from the farm to the food processor to the distributor has to be separated just for the state of Colorado. Those costs get pushed down to the consumers. Same thing for enforcement. State agencies are going to have to write hundreds of pages of requirements and enforce this in thousands of farms farms and thousands of food products in thousands of stores across the state. Those costs are all borne by taxpayers. So it is a misleading and inaccurate food labeling system that's bad for consumers, and it hurts farmers like Amber and her family. And we just welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you may have this evening.
Thanks, Dana. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Chris, and I'm the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall. We're discussing Proposition 105. If you want to learn more, you can go to factsabout105.com. But we actually want to take our first question from the audience. This one comes from Maria in Longmont. Maria, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. What's your question?
My question is, why was the proposition written with so many exceptions? So what is the purpose of that? I mean, we don't know what is actually being asked for if it's exceptions.
That's a great question, Maria. Dana, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, Maria, you're exactly right. The proponents talk about how it's all about giving consumers information about what's in their food. But, the very first thing they did when they wrote Proposition 105 is they exempted 2/3 of the food that's even sold in the state. And that includes thousands and thousands of food products that contain GMO or were made with GMO ingredients. They get a special exemption and won't be labeled. I mean, those are going to be products like, for example, all meat and dairy products that come from animals that were fed GMO grains and injected with GE medications. Well, they won't be labeled only because they get a special exemption. Same thing for products such as cheese and cheese products. They get a special exemption, so none of those products, even though they contain GMO ingredients in them, will not be labeled. That provides misinformation to consumers, and it conflicts with national labeling standards we currently have, and it's one of the many reasons that Proposition 105 deserves a no vote.
Thanks so much, Dana. We want to hear from you tonight, so if you do have a question you want to ask, push 0 to ask your question, just like Maria did. But we also want to ask you a couple questions tonight. And so we're going to take our first poll question, and what we need you to do is use your keypad to answer the question. So our question is, what concerns you most about Proposition 105? Press 1 on your phone if you're concerned about the impact this will have on local farmers. Press 2 if you're concerned about the increasing grocery costs. Press 3 if you're concerned about misleading labeling. And press 4 if you're concerned about all of these things. Again, press 1 if you're concerned about the impact on local farmers. 2 if you're concerned about the increase in grocery costs. 3 if you're concerned about misleading labels. 4 if you're concerned about all of these things. And we're going to take our next question from Diana in Lakewood. Diana, you had a question there?
Yes, my question was, you talk about that there will be a higher food cost. Does anybody know, or has anybody estimated exactly how much it will cost or add to a food bill on an annual basis?
Hey, Diana, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that one, and Amber probably has some comments to make as well. I'm a cost-sensitive shopper myself, so this is an important issue to me. So there have been a number of studies that have been done on single-state labeling policies like Proposition 105. And those studies have indicated for about the average family of 4, the cost to increase of groceries is about $450 a year. And those costs come in a couple of different ways. Number one is from the segregation that's required. So if you think about it, under Proposition 105, every ingredient for Colorado food has to be segregated, starting with the farm, and then how all those products are shipped to a food processor, and then they have to be completely segregated at a food processor facility, so there can be GMO foods and non-GMO foods, and then to go to distribution warehouses. There's going to distribution warehouses only for Colorado foods, and then for foods from the surrounding states. Those are enormous costs that get pushed down to consumers. The other costs are in the form of ingredient substitution. There's going to be a lot of food producers who don't want to put an inaccurate and misleading label on their product, as is required under Proposition 105. So what they're going to have to do to avoid that is they're going to have to remake their food just for the state of Colorado using higher-priced non-GMO ingredients. That's where the costs come into for Colorado consumers. Amber?
Yes. Thank you, Diana. Dana, definitely it would impact us as we as we grow GMO and non-GMO products, and we would have to buy a whole separate piece of equipment, a whole separate transportation use, as well as a storage facility in order to comply with the Proposition 105 stringent the demands that it creates on us. And that is with a 0% threshold that it calls for, that would be very unrealistic for us to meet with those demands. And so, of course, those costs would have to be inferred onto the consumer, which, of course, is yourself and as well as myself.
Great. So we're going to take more questions here. And, again, this is all about interactivity. So if you have a question you want to ask, all you have to do is press 0 on the phone to ask that question. Next, we're going to go to Bev in Westminster. Bev, you had a question about GMOs. Are you there?
Yes, I am. What is GMO, and who decided to do this? Who made this amendment, or whatever you call it?
Bev, I'd be happy to answer that question for you. This is Dana. Let me answer your second question first and your first question second. So you asked where this came from, Proposition 105. This is a group of out-of-state companies, and they've really been floating around these initiatives to various states. It started years ago in Oregon, and Oregon voters rejected it. And 2 years ago, they took it to California. California voters rejected it. Last year, Washington voters rejected it. And now here it is in the state of Colorado. So it's really just a recycled initiative. It continues to have the same fatal flaws. It provides nothing but misleading and inaccurate information. And so that's where the measure came from. Your other question you asked about what is a GMO. A GMO is just simply a very precise way of breeding crops. We've been breeding crops since the dawn of agriculture. Using GMO techniques just is a far more precise way to breed a crop, and it just gives gives the outcomes that certain farmers are looking for. For example, they creates crops that use less water and less herbicides and get greater yields and things such as that. So Colorado farmers want to have the option to use those crops.
Thanks, Dana. We're going to take our next question from Renee. But again, if you have a question you'd like to ask us, all you have to do is push 0 on your phone. We want to hear from you. And our next question comes from Renee in Greenwood Village. Renee, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, Renee.
Okay, I am concerned about the safety of using GMOs in my food and the possibility of improving my health as a senior citizen by not labeling, by not having the ability to label and know exactly what's going into my food. That's my question.
That's a great question. Amber, do you want to go ahead and address that?
Yes, most definitely. Thank you, Renee. I appreciate definitely your concerns, and I want to convey to you that we, as farmers, really want to have transparency in the food production cycle. I, like you yourself, I am concerned about what I eat and what I feed for my family. However, there has been no direct studies that say that there's any health concerns with GMOs. And with this Proposition 105, it would not directly tell you what GMOs are in your food, and as well as the existing labels that we have in place, such as for non-GMO and organic, tell you exactly what's in your food, and this would contradict with that.
That's exactly right, Renee. One thing, and Amber kind of touched on this as well, not only have we been eating these foods for 20 years, literally there have been billions of people who've eaten trillions of meals with the GMO ingredients in them, and there hasn't been one negative consequence to that. And in fact, it's the most studied food of all time in our food supply system. But at the same time, I recognize that consumers want to know if there's GMO ingredients in their food, and that's exactly where Proposition 105 fails consumers. It doesn't tell you which ingredients are in GMO and how much, and yet there's so many special exemptions and loopholes of thousands of food products that actually contain GMOs get a special exemption. That's completely misleading, unlike the 2 nationwide labels of organic non-GMO. Both of those labels will accurately and reliably inform consumers if their food contains GMO ingredients.
Thanks so much, Amber and Dana. Again, if you have a question that you want to ask us, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone to ask that question. We're going to take our next question from Dorothea in Boulder. Dorothea, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for all the information. I was particularly interested in the mention of the economic studies of increased cost, studies that had been done on a state basis. So my question was, are there any states that have voted for state GMO, non-GMO labeling in addition to the federal? And if so, how was the legislation different in those states, and does it seem to be working in those states than what Proposition 105 is putting forward? So that's kind of my question. And incidentally, the outcome of GMOs is pretty much the equivalent of the Green Revolution, that you have to be old as the hills, as I am, to remember what it did in Southeast Asia. Get away with constant famine there.
You've got your facts right on a lot of this stuff. And you ask a great question, because you were talking about, what have other states done on this? Well, there's been no other state that has voted for GMO labeling. Now, the Vermont legislature, however, did pass a piece of legislation. And that, however, is not going in effect because it's tied up in the courts right now. So right now, if this were to pass, Colorado would be the only state that has voted this in. And here's what's really important to notice about this, is that Colorado's law would conflict with the law in Vermont if the law in Vermont was enacted. So already there would only be 2 states under that scenario with GMO labeling, and they conflict with one another. That's why this system fails, because the food that would be sold in Vermont couldn't be sold in Colorado. That's why, we really believe that every farmer and food producer and consumer should be treated equally, and that's why the federal labeling standards work. That's why the non-GMO label works, and that's why the organic label works. Both are reliable and accurate and treat everybody fairly for that.
Thanks, Dana. Again, we want to hear from you tonight, so please press 0 on your phone if you'd like to ask a question. Before we get to our next question from the audience, we actually want to ask you another poll question. So we want you, using your keypad now, to tell us what action you're willing to take to help protect Colorado farmers. Push 1 on your phone if you're willing to encourage your friends and family to vote no on Proposition 105. Push 2 if you're willing to write a letter to the editor about voting no on Proposition 105. Push 3 if you're willing to share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Proposition 105. Push 4 if you're willing to do all of these things. Again, 1, to encourage your friends and family to vote no on Proposition 105. 2, to write a letter to the editor about voting no on Proposition 105. 3, to share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on 105. Or 4, to do all of these things. Again, if you have a question you'd like to ask, please press 0. Our next question comes from Lou. Lou, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is, since all these other states have refused to pass this amendment, why are they pushing it here in Colorado? I'm a senior citizen, lived here forever, and we've always had fresh vegetables and fruit, apples and whatever, and we never had that problem. So now all of a sudden they're pushing it on Colorado where all the other states have refused it. So I just don't understand why it's out there as an amendment, and having us vote on it. If it's not working for other states, why would it be even discussed?
Lou,
that's my question.
No, you make a good point, because it's a bad policy in the other states, and they all recognize it. I mean, they've gone to these states with the same flawed measure, and now they brought it here. And this is something that really impacts not only just the Colorado consumers, but Colorado farmers as well. And what we have here is a out-of-state special interest groups who really are just shopping this around from state to state to see if they can eventually pass this agenda. And, that's a shame, because in the end, here's what we end up with: bad information on labels on the food that is purchased, increased costs at the grocery store, and hurting Colorado farmers. It's a flawed measure. Other states have looked at it, have rejected it for those same reasons, and that's why our coalition has come together and is urging a no vote on Proposition 105.
Lou, this is Amber, and I'd also like to comment on that, that it would definitely impact us family farmers, and it would set precedents for all other ag products, such as dairy, such as meat, and that would definitely impact the small family farmer, which my husband and myself and my father-in-law, we are. And that is definitely most of what grows your food that you eat on your table is small family farmers like us. And we have one hired hand, so there's four of us that take care of the food that you eat on your table, and we are not unique. This Proposition 105 is definitely concerning for us, and how it would impact our livelihood. In that if we do not, by chance, meet that 0% threshold that it demands, that could mean horrible fines for us and potentially put us out of business, all for just choosing what we want to grow, what's best for our farm and for our family. So it's just very, very inconceivable how we would be able to meet the demands of this proposition.
Thanks, Amber. Again, if you have a question you want to ask tonight, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. And next up, we're going to go to Bryant in Denver. Bryant, are you there?
Hello, I'm here.
Great. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, my question is, we're always talking about what it's going to cost the farmers, but we're not talking about what's good for the consumer. The consumer is the person that has to suffer if we don't have the GMO in there. We need to know what's in the ingredients. We need to know what kind of pesticides they're using on their farming and their seeds and whatnot. And basically, it's going to cost us in the long run with our health. If we don't know exactly what we're eating, and you're saying that it's going to cost you money, it's going to cost us even more money by not knowing what's in the ingredients and what pesticides you're using and anything else that you put in there.
You make a good point that there are consumers who want to know whether there's GMO ingredients in their food, and there's a variety of reasons that consumers may want to know. But see, that's where Proposition 105 fails those consumers. Because the very first thing that they did is they exempted 2/3 of the food that's even sold in the state of Colorado. So we already have just a fraction of the food that's even sold that would be subject to these labeling requirements. And you have to remember the way that this is written, it's meant to be that the absence of a label will mean that there's no GMO ingredient in there. Well, see, that's where it's wrong, because if you're going through the grocery store and you're looking, for example, at cheese or a cheese product or, meat or eggs or something like that, there won't be a label on it. So you'll think, oh, it wasn't made with any GMO ingredients. You'd be wrong. What it did get was just a special exemption. That's where it misleads consumers. It doesn't tell you which ingredients are GMO. It doesn't tell you how much is GMO. And then it has all these special exemptions and loopholes. But at the same time, like I said, Bryant, I recognize that there are consumers who do prefer to purchase these foods. There already are not one but 2 different labeling standards that don't have all these exemptions and special loopholes. Consumers can look for either the organic or non-GMO labels. Those are reliable and accurate. That's where Proposition 105 fails consumers, and that's why we believe it deserves a no vote.
Bryant, this is Amber, and I'm a family farmer, and I can definitely hear your concerns in your voice. And as a farmer, and not only as a farmer, but also as a consumer, I buy food for my family, and I look at labels. And Proposition 105 would definitely not answer any questions that I might have on what I want to buy. It's definitely misleading. And with that, like as what Dana said, with that, for example, most of our sugar, table sugar that we buy at the grocery store comes from sugar beets. And the end product that we buy in the grocery store has no detectable GE product in it. There's no test that can tell whether or not it comes from cane sugar or sugar beet sugar. That would have to be labeled. So that right there is very misleading. It's very confusing on what we're buying. With that, genetically modified crops help us to use less pesticides, help us to use less water, helps us to the carbon footprint is dramatically less when we use genetically modified crops. So this Proposition 105 is just a very, very bad idea for Colorado farmers and consumers, as I am both.
Thanks, Amber. If you want to learn more about Proposition 105, you can go to factsabout105.com. Again, that's factsabout105.com. And we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a question, please push 0 on your phone to ask that question. And next, we're going to go to Pamela in Loveland. Pamela, are you there to ask your question?
Yes, this is actually, I was just wondering, what is the motivation of the proponents of this issue? I mean, what is the driving force behind these groups that you say are coming from other states?
Pamela, I think what the proponents are looking for is they've got an agenda, and they want to stigmatize other food companies' products. I mean, that's the only reason you can explain why they've written something like Proposition 105. I mean, one other point we haven't touched on, in fact, to show you how unfair this is to Colorado farmers and food producers. Written into Proposition 105, it says that any food or farm product that is exported from the state would still have to have a label on it. So let's say we've got a food company that's manufacturing, say, a jam or a jelly, and they're going to ship it off to Arizona. Even though it sits in a grocery store in Arizona, it still has to have the Colorado label on it saying that it was made with these GE ingredients in that. No other food product, no other food company in the entire country would have to comply with this regulation other than Colorado farmers and Colorado food producers. So the proponents are shopping around this misleading measure that is just so onerous for farmers, food producers, and increases costs for consumers, and it's why we believe it deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Again, press 0 if you'd like to ask a question on tonight's telephone town hall. Our next question comes from Pat in Highlands Ranch. Pat, are you there?
Sure enough.
Great. Go ahead and ask your question, Pat.
I'm curious about one aspect, many aspects of it, but I'm sure that most of the information that you are giving out is very accurate, but I wonder is this applicable to individual farms, or does it exclude the large companies that many farmers associate with?
Pat, this is Amber, and I have a small family farm here in Erie, and this would definitely impact my family. My family and it's my husband, my father-in-law, and we have one hired hand, and that is typically across the board, largely most of the family farms that grow your food that you have on your table. It's not the big corporations. It's really the mom and pop kind of operation that we have here, and this would definitely dramatically impact us in that we would have to buy, in order to meet the demands that Proposition 105 wants of us. We would have to buy a whole new harvesting equipment, whole new transportation equipment, and storage equipment. And that could essentially put us out of business, and all just for choosing to grow what's best for our family farm. It's very unfair and very inconceivable that we would be put out of business just for choosing what's best for us. So I do 100% think and believe that 105 really goes after the family farmer more than anybody else.
Thanks, Amber. Our next question comes from Carol. Carol, are you there? Carol, are you still there?
Yes. As soon as I find my phone.
No
Hello?
problem. What's your question, Carol?
It's more of a something that I saw on TV recently about GMO, the whole issue, and they pointed out that Europe has had GMO labeling for years with no increased cost, generally speaking, and I'm curious if you have any comments on that issue, that the GMO labeling is already taking place in many European countries.
Hey, Carol, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question. Actually, Proposition 105 is unlike what's required in the EU. There's different standards. In fact, in the EU, first of all, that's an entire country, almost an entire continent there, and this is 1/50th of a country. So that's very different right there. Also, under the EU labeling standards, it tells you which ingredients are genetically engineered. Proposition 105 doesn't do that. At the same time, though, it actually requires, Proposition 105 requires labels on food that don't contain GMO ingredients. The proponents are real fond of saying that there was no cost increase in the EU. That simply is not the case, nor have they ever once been able to back that up. And in fact, scientific and governmental leaders in the EU are all urging a reversal of their policy on labeling because it has led to less consumer choice, higher price, and they're just not using the farming practices that would be best for those countries. So at the same time, this really is about what happens for Colorado, because Colorado is just 1 out of 50 states, and it would require a special system just for Colorado foods. Farmers would have to farm their products differently and label them. Food producers would have to make their food products, and even if they ship them out to other states, they would still have to have this inaccurate and misleading label on it, and the cost would be borne by Colorado consumers and Colorado taxpayers, too. That's one thing we haven't talked much about, but, their state agency is going to be responsible and given a free hand to write hundreds of pages of regulations, and they're going to have to monitor thousands of farms and thousands of food producers for thousands of products across the state. That's got to be paid for by taxpayers.
Thanks, Dana. Again, if you have a question you want to ask, you should press 0 on your phone. If you want to learn more, you can go to Facts About 105. And we actually have another question we want to ask you. This year everyone's going to start getting their ballots in the mail in the next coming days. So we want to know when you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no and send it back in. So if you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no and send it back in this coming weekend and early next week, please press 1 on your phone now. If you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no and send it in the week after that, press 2 on your phone. And if you're going to wait until right before the election to fill out your ballot and send it back in, press 3. Again, push 1 if you're going to fill it out and vote no and send it back in this week. Push 2 if you're going to fill it out and send it back in late next week. And push 3 if you're going to wait until right before the election to fill out your ballot and mail it back in. So our next question comes from Laura in Aurora. Laura, you had a question about what's labeled. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Go ahead and ask your question. We can hear you well.
You may have already answered the question in another question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. what would have to be labeled? Would it just be the actual produce or things made from the produce? For example, is it just the tomato? Or if I buy a can of tomatoes that has those tomatoes in it, would that can have to be labeled? I'm hoping that makes sense.
Laura, that does make sense. I got what you're talking about. This is Dana. I'm happy to answer that question for you. I know you just probably picked an example, but I did just want to say there are no GMO tomatoes for starters. In fact, there's really only a handful of GMO crops. It's crops like sugar beets, which is Colorado farmers are huge growers of sugar beets. The sugar beets and alfalfa and soy and corn and cotton. There's just really a handful of ingredients that are GMO crops. But when you talk about the crops that'll have to be, what gets labeled, what it really is it's the processed foods certainly would as well, and that's where we get into the really inaccurate information to consumers. Because Amber was talking about it a little bit earlier when she talked about the sugar beet sugar that comes from the Colorado sugar beet growers. Once you process that sugar, there's no GMO content in it, but yet it'd have to be labeled. Same thing is true for like cornstarch and corn oil and soybean oil. All those products, and you think about all those products that are in other products, like in every salad dressings and condiments and other processed foods, all of them would have to be labeled saying they contain GMO ingredients, even though they don't. That's completely misleading and inaccurate information to consumers. That's why Proposition 105 fails them, and it deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Again, press 0 if you have a question you'd like to ask. Our next question comes from Sue in Littleton. Sue, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, my question is, first of all, who determines the federal labeling of GMOs or the no GMO thing?
Hey, Sue, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. There's a couple of different labels that we talked about. So the FDA and the USDA, Food and Drug Administration, they regulate some of the labeling standards, the organic standards for the non-GMO products. At the same time, there's another nationwide labeling standard, which is the non-GMO verified project. They verify all products as well, and in fact, they verify. They have tens of thousands of products that they have for a labeling system that requires non-GMO foods. So we have those two national labeling standards. And I think you go ahead. You had a further second part of your question?
I do. Who are the people other than the government that determines non-GMO?
Well, like I said,
there's a second group.
Right, there's the non-GMO project, so that's the non-GMO verified label. So that's the second group. So we have a government standard for it, and then we also have the non-GMO label, which is more of a it's not a government-related label, but it's a voluntary process that companies can go through to show that their foods are GMO-free, and then they get labeled on them as saying they're such. So both of those are reliable and accurate labels that are out there. And again, they actually conflict with Proposition 105 because Proposition 105 has all these exemptions and loopholes that the two national labeling standards don't allow. It's why it fails consumers who are looking for information about whether their food contains GMO ingredients in it. Proposition 105 fails them, and we think it deserves a no vote for that reason.
Thanks, Dana. Again, if you have a question, press 0 on your phone. If you want to learn more, go to factsabout105.com. Our next question comes from Coral. Coral had a question, looks like, about who initiated this. Coral, are you on the phone?
I am. I was interested to know who wrote Proposition 105 and what their interest was.
Hi, Coral. This is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. This is an initiative that's been around, it's been floating around several other states. Oregon, they've rejected it. California rejected it. Washington rejected it. Now this same group, this out-of-state group, has brought it to California and seeing if they can get it passed here. It's the same flawed measure, though, that we've seen from the beginning. It still gives the bad information, increases the cost, and it really puts an enormous burden on family farmers and food producers within the state of Colorado. So it's just simply been a special interest group who's been shopping this around to see if they can get somebody to bite on it, and there has been no state that has voted to support these GMO labeling laws for the reasons we talked about, increased costs and what it does for farmers. So that's why our coalition has come together. That's why we think that Proposition 105 deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Our next question is going to come from Mary in Loveland. Mary, are you there?
Yes, I sure am. Hello from Loveland, Colorado, right next to Johnstown and Milliken, where all the beets grow. Anyway, my deal was just as the same as the previous person who wanted to know, where did this come from? And she had, the response answered my question. But all I can say is I'm 65, my husband's in his 70s, and he grew up as a farmer. I come originally from Wisconsin, like 45 years ago, and have lived in this area. And I don't want anybody hurting the little farmers in our area. And I'm already had decided I was voting no on this proposition. But my question would be is, how did he come up with this kind of thing, and why so many of the dairy products from my home state are not involved in it anyway? What are you going to do to cheese?
Mary, this is Amber. Mary, this is Amber, and I'm a family farmer, and God bless you. You're wonderful. I thank you so much for your enthusiasm and your support. Where exactly it comes from, who knows? But definitely I agree with you that it would definitely, Proposition 105 would hurt the small family farmer like myself. And I just thank you so much for your support, and I encourage you to vote no and spread the word.
Dana, do you want to say some closing remarks here as well?
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us tonight. We spent nearly 45 minutes having a great discussion on Proposition 105 and what it really means for Colorado voters and consumers and taxpayers. And it's very clear, this is a poorly written measure, and it doesn't provide consumers the information that they may be looking for. I think that it fails on its fundamental promise. Because it provides so many special exemptions and loopholes. In fact, 2/3 of the foods even sold in the state wouldn't be labeled. And then thousands of other food products that don't contain any GMO ingredients in them have a label on them saying that they do. That provides inaccurate and misleading information. Colorado consumers deserve better, and they can get better with the 2 national labeling standards that are available, the organic and non-GMO label. Both are reliable and accurate. At the same time, Proposition 105, it fails consumers and taxpayers. Studies have been done that says the cost of groceries go up by at least $450 a year for the average family of 4, which, really makes sense because it's a Colorado-only labeling system. So all food will either has to be specially handled, specially labeled, or specially made just for the state of Colorado. Of course, those costs get pushed down to consumers. At the same time, state government is going to have to enforce this. They're going to have to monitor thousands of farms and tens of thousands of food products and thousands of stores. There is no funding source identified for it, nor is there a limit of taxpayer money that can be spent. And that's why our coalition has come together, and we urge you to vote no on this costly, misleading measure.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks, Amber, and thank you all for your wonderful questions tonight. We really enjoyed having this discussion with you. If you want to learn more, you can go to factsabout105.com. If you want to join our coalition, you can go to nooon105.com. This is the first year everyone has a ballot that's been mailed to them, so please make sure you fill it out and you mail it back. Your ballot has to arrive by Tuesday, November 4th, so please make sure you mail it no later than Halloween. Thanks so much for your time tonight. Have a great evening, and if you have a question we didn't get to or you have a comment that you want to share, we're going to put you right now into a voicemail system so you can leave that question or comment. Have a great evening, and thanks for your